Dragons soared through the skies, adventurers clashed in epic battles, and spells were cast like scenes from a fairy tale. It was everything the boy had ever dreamed of as a child. His new life in this extraordinary world had just begun, or so he believed. Despite the enchanting sights, Asfiel lacked the comforts he had once taken for granted. There were no baths, no proper meals, and certainly no electricity. The civilization resembled something out of the medieval age, far removed from the convenience of the modern world he had left behind. As he lay in bed, disappointment settled in. What he once thought was paradise began to feel like a downgrade. Ro got Isekai'd and realized too late it didn't come with plumbing. He turned his eyes toward the glowing moon outside his window, longing for the freedom to move between worlds at will. In that moment, a portal materialized before him, swirling with mysterious energy. The boy stared in awe, sensing the awakening of a power deep within him. It was the Moongate. Dimensional travel, his unique ability. With it, he could traverse countless worlds, each with its own rules and wonders. He journeyed through lands dominated by dinosaurs, others ruled by futuristic machines, and realms beyond human understanding. Eventually, he found himself standing in a place that felt familiar: Japan. He was now a young man, and it had been over a decade since he'd seen it. He never imagined he'd return. Just then, an old man noticed him and approached, curious about the stranger's presence. Caught off guard, the young man struggled to explain himself. Instead, the man extended an offer of lunch. During the meal, the young man found himself overwhelmed with emotion. It had been years since he'd last tasted soba, and the simple dish moved him to tears. It was then that the man made an observation. The young man, though clearly not Japanese, spoke with a perfect accent. Confused, the boy looked into a nearby mirror and was met with a reflection that was no longer his own. Golden hair, green eyes, a face foreign to the one he remembered. Somewhere along the way, his appearance had changed, yet his speech remained fluent. He suspected this was another effect of his skill. From that point forward, the boy began to travel frequently between worlds. One discovery stood out: no living being besides him could pass through the Moongate. However, non-living objects could. That realization opened a door to possibilities far beyond mere exploration. He saw opportunity in the differences between the two worlds. In Japan, a gold nugget could buy a mansion. In Asfiel, it barely amounted to a month's wage. On the flip side, spices and sweets held immense value in Asfiel. A single luxurious cake could fetch the price of a house. With that in mind, the young man began to envision a new purpose, not as an adventurer but as a merchant between worlds. He would bring goods from Japan into Asfiel, and in doing so, create a fortune. Life in Asfiel may have lacked convenience, but with the right strategy, he could afford every comfort he desired, even a trip to a proper bathhouse. One day, an old woman approached the young man and thanked him for his help, noting how much the elderly villagers appreciated his kindness. As a token of gratitude, she handed him some money. He accepted it with genuine appreciation, even cheerfully declaring that he would spend it all on sweets. The woman was amused and surprised, asking if he truly loved sweets that much. The young man proudly confirmed it before politely excusing himself. Of course, he couldn't admit that he planned to resell the money's value in another world, so he said nothing more. Now it was time to begin his journey as a merchant. Later, the young man, whose name was Alan, returned to Asfiel. He handed a piece of chocolate to a local merchant named Albert. Curious, Albert asked where Alan had gotten such a treat, but Alan remained vague and instead asked whether nobles might be interested in buying it. Albert responded that nobles would absolutely be drawn to it, and many would be captivated by such a luxurious sweet. It was clear Alan sought Albert's assistance, and though Albert admitted he had no direct ties to the nobility, he suggested that he might be able to connect Alan to someone who did. Still, something seemed to trouble Albert. Alan noticed and asked if there was a problem. Specifically, if selling to nobles might be an issue. Albert explained the risks. Going directly to nobles could draw all kinds of unwanted attention. Other merchants might not take kindly to someone bypassing the usual networks. In noble society, sweets weren't just treats. They were symbols of power, gifts in political dealings, and signs of wealth. As a result, merchants often organized themselves, managing farmers and confectioners collectively. Violating these unspoken agreements could invite backlash. But Alan, not seeing the big picture, merely commented that Albert's shop was small because of his fear of those said merchants. The remark irked Albert, although he conceded that Alan wasn't entirely wrong. A small-time merchant like himself could never stand toe-to-toe with those serving the elite. Albert's really out here fearing the dessert cartel. Albert eventually told Alan that he would have to find another merchant if he wanted to sell chocolates. Though slightly disappointed, Alan respected the decision. But he wasn't giving up entirely, just shifting gears. He already had another product in mind. Albert, on the other hand, was taken aback by Alan's relentless enthusiasm for sales. Alan clarified that he merely wanted Albert's professional opinion. Before they could continue, two mothers walked into the shop, delighted to see them. Alan greeted them casually and asked if they were out shopping. One of the mothers expressed surprise at seeing him there and quickly took interest in the item he was holding, asking what it was. Alan simply said it was an exotic sweet he had come across. The girl then asked if he intended to become a merchant, to which he replied that he was merely curious about the trade. Albert, realizing this was an ideal moment to test the product's appeal, encouraged Alan to let the mothers try the sweets. Alan hesitated, worried about giving away too much, but Albert didn't seem concerned. A lack of caution that in Alan's mind explained why Albert's shop had remained small. Alan handed the sweets to the mothers, who accepted them eagerly. As expected, they found them delicious and immediately wanted to buy more. Before leaving, they promised to spread the word, which left Alan feeling both excited and mildly pressured. Turning back to Albert, Alan looked apologetic for promoting his product inside someone else's store. But Albert was unimpressed. He told Alan rather bluntly to take his business elsewhere. At that moment, Alan realized that every last one of his products had been sold. Albert considered it a decent result, but Alan paid it little mind, believing the success was thanks to the mothers who helped out. Still, he couldn't shake the thought that if only the chocolates had sold instead, he might have been sitting on a small fortune by now. The potential value gnawed at him, a sharp reminder of what could have been. Albert, grounded as ever, mentally warned against underestimating the trade. Alan, recognizing the support he'd received, offered his thanks before departing. He then left behind the unsold chocolates as a token of appreciation. Though Albert tried to stop him, Alan continued on his way, leaving Albert thinking that perhaps the young man had more potential at this field than he initially thought. Later that day, Alan made his way to a bathhouse. The warm water was a rare comfort, a momentary escape from the uncertainties that weighed on him. Without a registered identity in Asfiel, his options remained limited. He couldn't rent a place to stay, hold a stable job, or pull himself out of this cycle of poverty. Yet, even with all that hanging over him, the bath lifted his spirits. In that brief moment of relaxation, a new sense of hope emerged. Selling sweets hadn't made him wealthy, but it confirmed something vital. Japanese goods held value in this world. The challenge now was figuring out what to sell and how to navigate the unfamiliar marketplace. The merchants here operated under their own systems, bound by rules he had yet to understand. There was still much to learn. Later on, he found himself at a local pub. The alcohol served there was surprisingly good, adding to the quiet luxuries of the day. Coming right after the bathhouse visit, the drink felt well earned. But before long, the atmosphere shifted. The noise died down as silence swept across the room. A group of girls had entered, drawing everyone's attention. The sudden change in mood was undeniable. Whispers rippled through the crowd, identifying one of them as the Black Princess. Her presence in the town came as a shock to the patrons. Alan, watching from his seat, began to wonder. She was like him, a transfer who might be from Japan, someone capable of moving between worlds. So she's the Black Princess, but is Japanese? In Asfiel, individuals with unusual origins weren't as rare as one might expect. Every town had at least one or two. Those born in this world but who retained memories from a past life were known as reincarnators. Those who appeared from another world entirely were referred to as transfers. Both types were often gifted with heightened physical or magical capabilities, and many received blessings called skills. As a result, they frequently became adventurers, researchers, or merchants dealing in magical disciplines. This was Alan's first time encountering someone else who shared his circumstances. Around him, the whispers continued. The Black Princess, despite the rumors, was far more beautiful than many expected. She was the leader of the Crimson Moon Brigade, an all-female group of adventurers. Not just eye-catching, she was known for defeating powerful monsters and earning the trust of both nobles and influential merchants. Still, to Alan, seeing her in person stirred not admiration but intimidation. Not long after, Alan stood up to ask for the bill. The owner was surprised that he was leaving so early, as it was unusual for him to stop at just one drink. Alan only smiled, explaining that something had come up. Later on, Alan made a trip back to Japan to stock up on supplies. One of his key purchases was a set of manga. At the store, he relied on the guidance of the cashier, Kita, to confirm which titles were currently trending. Alan wasn't up to date with the latest hits, but Kita, being a manga enthusiast himself, helped him choose the top title from the weekly shonen camp. Along with the manga, Alan also grabbed a women's fashion magazine. When asked about it, he claimed someone had asked him to pick it up. After paying, he promptly left the store. The truth was actually different. No one had asked him for anything. Approaching the Black Princess directly had felt too risky at the time, but he strongly suspected she was a transfer, someone like him. And unlike the others, Asfiel had little in terms of entertainment, so he hoped that these manga could serve as a bridge. The purchase was costly, especially for someone in his situation, and all he could do now was hope his gamble would pay off. Once back in Asfiel, Alan made his way to the place where he intended to deliver the manga. But things didn't go as planned. The restaurant was closed to the public due to a private event, and its windows were completely shuttered. Rumor had it the Black Princess was inside. If he missed this chance, there might not be another. Leaving could make him seem suspicious, but standing around might only worsen the impression. While he was hesitating, one of the girls from the Crimson Moon Brigade took notice. She spotted him loitering near the entrance and called him out. Seizing the opportunity, Alan explained that he had something to give to the Black Princess. He handed her the manga, stressing that it was a gift, free of charge. If it wasn't needed, she could simply discard it. Without waiting for a reaction, Alan quickly took his leave. Although confused, the girl decided to take the package inside. Within the restaurant, another member of the Crimson Moon Brigade, Kalkira, called out to the girl from outside, Ina, asking what the item was. Upon hearing that it came from some weirdo outside for the Black Princess, Kalkira inspected it carefully. After confirming that it wasn't laced with poison or equipped with any kind of dangerous magic, Aina handed it over to the Black Princess. Upon receiving the package, the Black Princess showed hesitation, unsure whether to open it. Aina, who had delivered it, offered reassurance, mentioning that the person who handed it over claimed she could discard it if she wasn't interested. With that, the Black Princess opened the package. Inside were several books. At first glance, Ina found them to be ordinary in appearance, but their presence was certainly unusual. She couldn't understand why such items were specifically addressed to their captain. Then, without warning, the Black Princess frantically asked who had given the package. In her previous life, the girl now known as the Black Princess had been running for her life, chased into the woods by a frantic mob calling her a Miko. Confusion clouded her mind, but she kept running. Moments earlier, she had simply been waiting to be picked up from school, but in an instant her surroundings warped. Without warning, she had been pulled into another world. Before she could comprehend what was happening, she was falling, plunging into an abyss. As darkness closed in, she surrendered to her fate, her final thoughts drifting to her father. But death never came. Instead, she awoke in an unfamiliar world. A couple stood by her side, relieved to see her regain consciousness. Alarmed, she questioned who they were. Noticing her unease, the woman gently apologized and explained that they were innkeepers. They had found her collapsed at the base of a cliff. The Black Princess confirmed that she indeed fell. When she asked if they had saved her, they deflected the credit, saying her survival was thanks to her own strength. Surviving such a fall was, according to them, something only a Miko could do. Still unfamiliar with the term, she asked what a Miko was. The couple explained that Mikos were divine messengers, beings from another world, marked by traits like black hair and blessed with unknown powers. Though she didn't yet understand her own abilities, the signs were there. Overwhelmed, she admitted that none of it made sense. The woman then handed her a warm cup of tea, advising her to rest first and make sense of everything later. Taking that advice to heart, she drank the tea and slowly calmed her thoughts. Once her strength returned, she expressed her gratitude and prepared to leave. The couple wished her well, and she returned the sentiment. From that moment, she began her journey, determined to find a way back to her own world. With her powers as a Miko, she managed to travel safely, never encountering danger despite being alone. But as stories of her presence spread, people began to gather around her. In time, the Crimson Moon Brigade came into being, a band that followed her loyally. Looking back, she realized how fortunate she was to have met such companions. They never asked about her purpose. They simply believed in her. She also hoped that one day she could tell them everything. In the present, the Black Princess visited the pub where Alan had been. She approached him, asking if he was the one who had sent the mysterious package. Alan greeted her with a smile and asked Zian, the pub's owner, to serve her a drink. As the pub neared closing time, Zian reminded Alan to lock up before leaving. They sat with one seat between them, the silence heavy. Alan broke it, admitting the awkwardness but explaining that this conversation was best kept private, something only shared between kindred souls. He asked if she was Japanese and she confirmed it, revealing that she was a reincarnator. When Alan asked her name, she introduced herself as Shizuku Sayoji, who was turning 18 that year. She then asked for his name, and Alan responded with a light introduction of his own, saying he was just a 20-year-old without a job. Shizuku asked for Alan's name from his original world, to which he replied that it was Masato Shinjo, a regular man who had been 25 when he died. Though she apologized for asking something so personal, Alan reassured her that it was fine. Shizuku then noticed something odd. Alan hadn't reacted to the name Sayoji. This suggested that the other transfers he had met might have been from a different time entirely. When Alan asked if she had been famous or perhaps even an idol, Shizuku realized he truly had no clue about her former life. Alan went on to speculate that they may have come from different timelines. Based on his own estimate, 20 years had passed since his death. Yet the Japanese base, with its distinctly Showa-era aesthetic, didn't quite reflect that passage of time. In that moment, Shizuku's interest spiked. She wanted to know more about his ability to return to Japan. She tried to press for details, but Alan quickly shut down the idea. According to him, bringing another living person across worlds was impossible. However, he could transfer objects and even deliver goods directly to her. He tried to lighten the mood by suggesting it wasn't such a bad arrangement. Shizuku didn't respond, her thoughts heavy, until Alan insisted she have another drink. With no bartender around, Alan brought out a bottle of tea from Japan. Though unsure if she would enjoy it, Shizuku accepted and took a sip. When Alan asked for her opinion, she smiled and told him it was delicious. Watching her, Alan was momentarily struck by how mature she seemed, and it was hard to believe she was only 18. Sensing her vulnerability, Shizuku apologized for showing such a raw side of herself. Alan assured her it was nothing to be ashamed of, admitting that he himself had once cried over eating soba after reincarnating. Shizuku, unfamiliar with the dish, piqued Alan's curiosity. He promised to bring some for her the next time he returned to Japan. Though she still hoped for a clue that could help her find her way home, this small comfort was a welcome consolation. Just then, Shizuku offered to sponsor Alan. In return, she requested that he procure specific items for her. Alan was caught off guard but agreed, warning her not to go overboard since he lacked both a stable income and legal identity in this world. Shizuku replied by offering to draft a letter on his behalf. She then asked if he was any good at organizing documents. The next morning, Shizuku was up early, waking the members of the Crimson Moon Brigade. She had an announcement to make. Alan would be joining them as their newest member. Alan really walked into a guild and accidentally joined a girl group. The revelation sparked an immediate reaction. Aina, startled, recognized him as the weird man from the other day and questioned if Shizuku was truly serious. However, Shizuku affirmed her decision, stating plainly that she trusted him. Alan, meanwhile, lingered cautiously at the doorway, fully expecting a reception like this. As the room processed the news, one of the girls stepped forward to question Shizuku again, voicing concern over Alan being a man. Shizuku clarified that Alan wouldn't be accompanying them on the field. Instead, he'd be working behind the scenes assigned to logistics. Without missing a beat, she appointed Aina as Alan's trainer, an announcement that immediately drew protest from the reluctant girl. Later that day, the two met for the so-called training session. Aina, clearly still uneasy, broke the silence with a question. She asked how Alan managed to earn the captain's interest, noting she had never seen Shizuku that enthusiastic before. Alan admitted it took some effort, but in the end it worked out, even if he hadn't expected to join the brigade himself. Meanwhile, Aina couldn't help but reflect on how unusual the situation was. In all their history, never had a man joined the Crimson Moon Brigade. Aina quickly pushed aside her earlier doubts, remarking that the extra manpower would be helpful regardless. Alan then asked if she'd really been handling all the brigade's logistics on her own, and she confirmed it, explaining that she and Shizuku were the only ones capable of reading and doing basic math. The weight of the task began to settle in on Alan, knowing that managing supplies for over 30 people was no small feat. Aina then laid out the plan. She would take care of stock checks while Alan would be in charge of restocking. She also mentioned that the Crimson Moon Brigade's name alone should be enough to keep merchants from charging him unfairly. Before he set out, Alan reminded her not to overwork herself. Later that day, Alan began his errands, still in disbelief over how everything had turned out. Originally, the plan was to become a merchant connected to the Crimson Moon Brigade, someone who could trade freely with nobles. Instead, he had ended up as one of their own. Now that he was part of the team, he knew he had to prove himself if he wanted to earn the trust of the other members. As he passed by Albert's shop, a group of familiar mothers called out to him, waving him over. They wasted no time confirming the rumor of whether he really joined the Crimson Moon Brigade. Alan was taken aback that the news had already reached them. The mothers laughed, explaining that gossip travels fast, and then teasingly asked if there was something going on between him and the Black Princess. Flustered, Alan quickly denied it, saying she had only been interested in the goods he sold. He was just an added bonus. Still, the speed of the rumors left him uneasy. One of the mothers mentioned how much she had enjoyed the sweets he brought last time, while another offered her congratulations and wished him luck in his new role. Alan responded with a sheepish laugh, saying he was only running errands for now. Then one of the mothers told him to visit her shop more often, promising him a discount. Shocked by the generous offer, Alan asked if she was really serious. After picking up some of the supplies, he realized just how much he owed these women and quietly noted that he couldn't thank them enough. That's when he heard someone shouting his name from the crowd. Turning around, he found himself surrounded by a small group of people, all excited to see him. Word had clearly spread fast, and now several townsfolk were offering their support and even supplies. The unexpected outpouring of kindness overwhelmed him. Caught in the emotion of it all, Alan couldn't hold it in any longer and let out a joyful scream. Later that day, Aina thanked Alan for his help and asked if he had finished his shopping run. Alan confirmed that he had and handed over the invoices, though he kept himself half hidden around the corner. Curious, Aina asked why he was acting so suspicious, so Alan explained that he was just being cautious. When Aina scanned the invoice, her expression changed instantly. Alarmed, Alan asked if he had gone over budget, but Aina quickly clarified that it was the opposite. The total cost was 20% lower than usual. Suspicious of the unusually low price, she questioned if Alan had done anything shady. Alan firmly denied it, explaining that he simply received goodwill discounts from a few acquaintances. He even told her to check with the merchants herself if she had any doubts. Hearing this, Aina relaxed and said there was no need to interrogate anyone. As she made her way to the door, she turned back with a smile, telling Alan he had done a good job. Later on, Alan returned to Japan, carrying with him a letter from Shizuku. As he looked at it, he couldn't help but wonder if it would truly make a difference. The Crimson Moon Brigade finally arrived at the royal capital, with Alan traveling alongside them. Shizuku acknowledged the group's hard work throughout their long journey and informed them that Lineberg would now serve as their new base of operations. Their team house had already been arranged, and everyone was instructed to find their assigned rooms and settle in. As the group dispersed, Shizuku pulled Alan aside. She asked him to return to Japan once he had completed his current responsibilities. Alan didn't mind, but asked if she needed something in particular. Shizuku replied vaguely, saying she didn't need any supplies this time and that Alan would understand once he got there. She didn't elaborate, turning away without offering further explanation. Before fully leaving though, she reminded him to pick up the next volume of Dream Love, a manga she clearly adored. Later, Alan arrived in Japan, only to find the village in a state of commotion. The old man he had once met, Genji, greeted him warmly, commenting on how long it had been. Curious, Alan asked about the gathering, and Genji explained that the people were from the Sayoji group. Apparently they had been searching for Alan for over a week, much to Genji's confusion, especially since Alan had never heard of them before. Seeing no point in hiding, Alan decided to approach the group. As he neared, he spotted a car and a young woman seated inside. She asked if he was Alan, and once he confirmed it, she invited him into the car, noting how hot it was outside. Inside the vehicle, the unfamiliar woman casually commented on the difficulty of finding him. She also complained about the lack of decent cigarettes in the area. Alan offered an apology but quickly realized he didn't even know her name. She introduced herself as Akira Kamiki, telling him to call her Akira. When Alan asked if her search had something to do with Shizuku's letter, Akira suddenly slammed the car door shut. Her demeanor shifted and it became clear that Alan's response had confirmed her suspicions. Without hesitation, Akira radioed her team announcing that the target had been secured and requesting backup. As tension filled the air, she warned Alan to cooperate if he wanted to remain unharmed. Her piercing gaze and chilling words made it clear she wasn't bluffing. Forced into submission, Alan had no choice but to go along with whatever was about to unfold. During the ride, he asked what the Sayoji group actually was. Akira explained that it was a sprawling corporate empire, deeply rooted in real estate and other crucial industries both in Japan and abroad. It functioned like a powerful zaibatsu, and its origins could be traced back to one of Kyoto's wealthiest families. Under the leadership of Ryugen Sayoji, Shizuku's father, it had grown into a major conglomerate. Akira also revealed that her family, the Kamikis, had served the Sayojis for generations. She herself had been by Shizuku's side since middle school. But 3 years ago, coinciding with the start of her full-time position at the estate, she began to notice that something wasn't right. There was a time when Akira served tea to Shizuku, and the girl complimented her for it. Akira responded with the usual courtesy, but Shizuku reminded her not to be so formal when it was just the two of them. Just then, Shizuku casually brought up the Dream Love anime, and asked if Akira had recorded the latest episode, to which she said yes. Shizuku then wondered if Akira planned to stay the night, suggesting they watch it together. Amused, Akira agreed to the idea without protest. But then, everything changed. One day, as Akira waited for Shizuku to return home, she was met with the devastating news that Shizuku had gone missing. It was abrupt and baffling. Akira demanded answers, questioning the guards and how such a disappearance could happen under their watch. Denial clouded her thoughts, convinced it had to be a mistake. Yet when they checked the surveillance systems, nothing unusual was found. Shizuku had vanished without a trace. Even now, the search continued. Specialist teams had been dispatched globally, yet every trail led to a dead end. With no leads and no breakthroughs, Akira turned to Alan, hoping he held the answers. They eventually reached their destination. Akira stepped out of the vehicle, offering an apology for the deception earlier, then urged Alan to get straight to the point. As they entered the massive structure looming before them, Alan was stunned. He hadn't imagined that such a facility existed near the quiet Akane village. Soon after, Akira knocked on a grand office door and announced their arrival before the chairman. Inside, Ryugen Sayoji, the head of the Sayoji family, greeted Alan, recognizing him from the contents of a letter his daughter had once written. Alan was immediately overwhelmed by the man's sheer presence, wondering if all men of such status exuded the same aura. Ryugen, however, quickly reassured him that he knew Alan wasn't responsible for Shizuku's disappearance. The letter, written in a unique cipher only known within the family, was proof that both the sender and its message were authentic. It meant that Shizuku was still alive and that she trusted Alan. Curious, Alan asked how they had tracked him down despite his lack of a permanent address or employment. Ryugen explained that the postmark on the letter had helped narrow their search, and the letter itself contained a detailed description of Alan. He then expressed admiration for him. Just as Akira had mentioned, Shizuku had vanished 3 years ago even while surrounded by dozens of guards. The circumstances were impossible to make sense of. But then the letter came, stating that she had found an ally and needed support. Now, Ryugen needed to hear everything Alan knew. Before continuing, Alan asked if the room had any surveillance systems in place. Ryugen assured him it didn't, and that the room was tightly secured, with even the windows fitted with one-way mirrors. Then, Alan decided to show him the truth instead. As he activated his power, Akira instinctively aimed her gun at him, but Ryugen quickly ordered all weapons lowered. Before them, a portal appeared, a moon gate, summoned by Alan's abilities. He explained that the gate was a link to another world and that Shizuku was on the other side. Ryugen was stunned. He asked about the conditions required to use the gate. Alan admitted that he didn't have all the answers, but what he did know was this. Aside from himself, only non-living things could pass through it. Ryugen, still skeptical yet intrigued, asked if he could touch the moon gate. With Alan's permission, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the glowing portal. He questioned if his daughter was truly on the other side. Alan confirmed it without hesitation, revealing that Shizuku now lived in a fantasy realm, leading a group of adventurers. It was a claim too fantastical for Ryugen to accept at face value, but the very existence of the moon gate left little room for denial. Akira, still cautious, questioned Ryugen's belief in Alan's story. Ryugen admitted that he remained doubtful because it all sounded like something out of a fairy tale. Still, he had a simple request. He handed Alan a smartphone and asked him to take a photo of Shizuku as proof. Though unfamiliar with the sleek modern device, Alan accepted the task. Ryugen assured him that Akira would handle the instructions. Meanwhile, Alan was in awe of the device because it looked far from the flip phones he once knew. Ryugen then made it clear that he still questioned Alan's intentions, uncertain how much truth or deception lay in his words. But the letter was real, written in a family cipher only they understood. Alan's delivery of it couldn't be ignored. With that, Ryugen extended a hand in gratitude, asking him to pass along his regards to Shizuku. Alan accepted the gesture, silently agreeing to the terms. Soon after, Alan returned to the fantasy realm of Asfiel and reunited with Shizuku. As she quietly sipped her tea, he informed her of his recent encounter with her father. He hadn't expected Ryugen to show up personally, much less with an entire entourage arriving in the rural village where Alan resided. Frustration bubbled up as he felt the whole situation had been excessive. But Shizuku calmly reminded him that at the time, she was the sole heir to the family. Alan dropped the subject, knowing she wasn't wrong. He then brought out the smartphone Ryugen had given him and explained its purpose, which was to serve as proof of her existence. Shizuku took the device with ease, revealing a surprising level of proficiency. As she explored the phone, she stumbled upon a video, a message prepared by Ryugen. Alan, watching from nearby, was impressed by the clarity of the footage, almost as if it were in ultra-high definition. Shizuku, however, was visibly moved. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched the screen, and Alan, realizing the intimacy of the moment, felt a hint of guilt for observing. Before she could hand the phone back, Shizuku noticed Alan had vanished. She found him downstairs, casually interacting with the other girls. He explained that it was a good time to introduce them to the smartphone, and with Shizuku's permission, the group quickly became excited. They insisted on taking a photo together, even pulling Shizuku into the impromptu gathering. Though caught off guard, she agreed. Alan gathered everyone and snapped the photo, capturing a rare moment of unity. Afterward, Aina approached Alan. She commented on how he seemed to be settling into life with the brigade. Alan wasn't so sure, as he still hadn't formed strong bonds with everyone. Aina reassured him that there was no rush, especially since adjusting to the new base took time. She then brought up the Royal Capital Street Festival, piquing his interest. She explained that the event was held every weekend in the capital, drawing merchants from across the land. The festival featured a wide range of goods, from everyday trinkets to luxurious items meant for nobles. Since the brigade wasn't set to resume their adventuring anytime soon, Aina encouraged him to pay it a visit. That's when Alan asked whether he would be allowed to set up a stall of his own. Alan had successfully secured an application for the street festival, but one problem remained. He had no idea what to sell. His thoughts were soon interrupted by the arrival of Camille, Luca, and Lazuli, members of the Crimson Moon Brigade. Camille greeted him with her usual cheer, immediately questioning what he was up to. When Alan mentioned he'd be heading out, Camille jumped to conclusions, teasing that he might be running away. Caught off guard, Alan admitted that part of him thought staying might just make things awkward for everyone. However, the girls quickly shut that idea down. None of them held any resentment toward him anymore. Lazuli in particular took a moment to apologize for how things started, explaining that their initial hostility came from past experiences with men. Luca chimed in, noting that they were actually thankful for Alan's presence, especially because their captain seemed lighter and more at ease since he had arrived. Lazuli went on to say that anyone who could contribute to the brigade was welcome. Camille agreed, mentioning that even Aina liked him. She then mentioned that he saw him more as a father figure. That claim sparked a mini debate, as the others argued that Alan felt more like a brother than anything else. Listening to their playful banter, Alan felt reassured that finally, he was beginning to feel accepted. Lazuli soon redirected the conversation back to his earlier task, asking what he was working on. Alan explained that he was filling out paperwork for the upcoming festival, planning to set up a small stall. The girls were surprised, curious about what he'd be selling. Alan confessed he hadn't decided yet. His current idea involved sweets targeted toward nobles. Still, he struggled to come up with more options. The girls quickly dove into brainstorming mode. Lazuli darted to the bookshelf and returned with one of Shizuku's favorite manga volumes. She excitedly suggested selling the books at the festival. The others lit up at the idea, thrilled by the prospect of having access to more volumes if Alan bought a batch. Meanwhile, Alan was skeptical. It seemed like Lazuli's suggestion came from a place of self-interest more than business savvy. He was also caught off guard by the fact that the girls could read Japanese. Still, he had to admit that entertainment goods could work. It might not be the most cost-effective option though. Though disappointed by the logistical concerns, the girls perked up again when Alan said he'd stock at least a few copies. That was all they needed to hear. With that settled, they eagerly promised to stop by his stall once the festival began. Later on, Alan made his way to Japan to return the smartphone to Ryugen. Yet even as he approached the task, he wasn't entirely sure if Ryugen had believed the contents he'd submitted. His uncertainty was briefly interrupted when Akira greeted him at the door, announcing that she would be acting as his assistant. Her unusually cheerful demeanor threw him off so much that he shut the door in her face. Afterward, Alan apologized, explaining that he'd simply been startled. He asked her to speak with him as she used to, but she declined. Still, her calm expression was enough to reassure him. Alan then mentioned that it seemed the chairman had accepted the proof he presented. Akira confirmed that Ryugen had been genuinely thrilled. Alongside the photo, the glowing mineral Alan had delivered, luminite, was confirmed to be a completely unknown substance. There was no longer any reason to doubt his story. Without delay, Akira handed him a set of documents and cards, stating that this was the promised support. Among the items were identity and residency papers, details about his assigned living space, which came fully furnished with a PC and other essentials, and a black credit card with no spending limit. She then showed him the balance in his new account, over 100 million yen. She really pulled out the entire sugar daddy starter kit. Alan was stunned. Though grateful, he couldn't help but feel that all of it was a bit too much. Akira then laid out two conditions. First, Alan would be expected to cooperate in the research surrounding the gate, as they were eager to understand his abilities and the nature of the other world. Second, and most importantly, he was to provide full support to Shizuku. As she emphasized the second condition, her expression turned sharp and unyielding, leaving Alan no choice but to agree. From that point forward, Akira informed him that she would oversee his security and assist him however necessary. Alan thanked her, then made a request of his own. Not long after, the two ventured into the city to search for entertainment goods. Though Alan could have made the selections himself, he admitted he was out of touch with modern Japan. Akira understood but remained curious about his intentions for opening a shop. Alan then explained that he needed to build connections. Back home, he relied on familiar faces. But this was his first time navigating the capital. Winning over nobles would stabilize his finances and grant the brigade better access to information and resources. Akira found his reasoning puzzling, pointing out that with the resources given to him, wealth was no longer a concern. Alan acknowledged this, but he admitted he wanted to earn his own way. He wasn't content with simply receiving support, and he wanted to build something of his own. Akira found his mindset unexpectedly sincere, and Alan found comfort in that. Akira then asked Alan if he had any plans to stock some items. However, before he could respond, his attention drifted toward a nearby store display filled with trading cards. Intrigued, Alan paused while Akira looked on, puzzled by his interest in them. Alan explained that in Asfiel, entertainment was a rarity. While nobles occasionally indulged in board games, they were often simplistic and uninspired. Trading cards, with their strategy and collectability, might stand out as something new. The only issue was choosing the right ones because many of the titles were unfamiliar to him. Akira then mentioned that the C Group operated across numerous industries, and entertainment was no exception. One of their subsidiaries even specialized in trading cards. Without hesitation, she made a phone call ordering an entire warehouse's worth of crossword puzzles. Alan panicked, urging her not to go overboard. Eventually, he opted to purchase only a few cards, explaining that he wanted to test the waters before committing fully. He thanked Akira for her help and mentioned his plan to look for sweets and books next. Aware that she had her own responsibilities, he told her it was okay not to accompany him. But Akira refused. She insisted on staying by his side, explaining that if anything happened to him, it would break Shizuku's heart. Alan was caught off guard by her straightforwardness. At that moment, he decided to place his full trust in her. Later, as they browsed through more shops, Akira showed Alan a stack of CDs. He was surprised and felt outdated, especially since he'd only known DVDs. It hadn't hit him until now how much the world had changed. Then something on a nearby TV caught his eye, a character from a show he recognized. He asked if it was Dream Love, the series Shizuku adored. At that, he noticed Akira had gone silent. She admitted it made her feel nostalgic. Shizuku had once invited her to watch it together, but the moment never came. Alan, sensing he might have touched a nerve, quickly apologized. But Akira reassured him that that wasn't her intention. She might have missed spending time with Shizuku, but being by her side wasn't the only way to serve her. Akira then offered to buy the CD so Alan could give it to Shizuku as a gift. Shortly after, she suggested compiling all the entertainment, manga, dramas, and more into a single tablet. If the people of Asfiel were craving joy, offering a wide selection would be more effective than a handful of items. As Akira pondered the idea, Alan watched her quietly, smiling to himself. At that moment, she reminded him of an older sister. When Alan returned to Asfiel, the first person to greet him was Lazuli, who quickly informed him that the permit for his festival stall had finally arrived. Wasting no time, he went to check it for himself, feeling a wave of relief that everything had been approved without any issues. As he reviewed the permit, Lazuli leaned in and asked in a hushed tone about the merchandise he was planning to sell. Alan told her that the goods, specifically the manga, would be delivered on the day of the festival, since they had no place to store the shipment at the base beforehand. That answer clearly didn't sit well with Lazuli. She looked genuinely annoyed that she wouldn't be able to get her hands on the manga right away. With a sigh and a hint of bitterness, she muttered that she hoped his stall would fail, just so she could get early access to the next volume. Damn, she really chose violence. Alan found her dramatic reaction more irritating than amusing, but he didn't press the matter. Changing the subject, Alan asked when Luca and the others were expected to arrive. Lazuli said they'd be coming in the evening, though she herself would show up a bit later with Camille because she still had a few tasks to wrap up. As the conversation shifted, she casually asked where Alan's booth would be set up, noting that it seemed like he was aiming for a wealthier audience. Alan answered that he had selected booth 13, located along the West Main Street. That response took Lazuli by surprise. She pointed out that the West Main Street was no ordinary location. It was prime real estate, typically reserved for the capital's most experienced merchants. Even more notable was its close proximity to the Central District, a place known for being sealed off from the rest of the city. According to Lazuli, the Central District was home to the highest-ranking nobles in the capital. It was heavily restricted, and most commoners rarely if ever laid eyes on the people who lived there. However, there were rumors that a few eccentric nobles occasionally snuck out to experience the street festival. If Alan's booth was truly that close to the Central District, he might end up catching the attention of someone far above the usual customer base. Still, Lazuli emphasized that all of this was just speculation. Alan didn't seem fazed by this. In fact, it made Lazuli suspect he had aimed for that exact booth on purpose. Alan neither confirmed nor denied it, simply leaving it to her imagination. Lazuli suddenly burst out laughing, which caught Alan off guard. When he asked why, she brushed it off, saying he was just very interesting. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment or sarcasm. Lazuli, confused by his reaction, eventually excused herself, saying she was looking forward to the festival. Once she left, Alan was left with a lingering sense of unease. But with the preparations finally complete, all that remained was to wait for the festival. Whatever would happen, he reminded himself, would happen. When the festival day finally arrived, the streets of Asfiel came alive with movement and excitement. Alan set up his booth, mentally assuring himself that all preparations were complete and that it was time to put his plans into action. Alongside the main goods, he had brought a small selection of books, though he intended to be selective about who he sold them to. His primary focus was chocolate, with trading cards included as a test. While the true crowds were expected to come in the evening, the morning already saw a decent turnout, mostly composed of upper-class individuals. The nearby booths offered high-end merchandise, but Alan believed his products could stand their ground. He was determined to make the most of the opportunity. As time passed, however, reality began to chip away at his confidence. Visitors walked by without stopping. No one seemed interested in his products. While the surrounding stalls buzzed with activity, his remained untouched. He couldn't help but question whether his products were too niche or if the problem was him. Life really gave him an expectation versus reality moment. It was then that Albert appeared, noting Alan's gloomy expression. Surprised, Alan asked what he was doing in the capital, and Albert explained that he was there for business. Upon discovering the festival, he decided to drop by, though he hadn't expected to see Alan as a merchant. With a teasing remark about Alan's booming business, it felt to Alan like Albert had shown up just to mock him. Albert denied this, and in a surprising turn, offered some advice despite their status as business rivals. He pointed out that unfamiliar goods, especially food, were a tough sell. Free samples might help, but given the clientele, most wouldn't eat them out in the open. Alan was disheartened to hear this, but he knew Albert was right. Albert continued, suggesting that Alan might have better luck targeting the middle class in future festivals, which were held every week. Though Alan accepted the advice, it clearly weighed on him. Noticing this, Albert encouraged him not to give up, reminding him that the afternoon crowd still lay ahead. In the world of business, he said, two things mattered most: quality and trust. And Alan had both. Though Albert considered himself a small-time merchant, and his words might not carry weight, Alan didn't see it that way. Although he really did believe his shop was small. Thanks for rubbing that in, bud. As Albert turned to leave, Alan thanked him for the advice. But before walking away completely, Albert paused, telling Alan that he might discover something beyond the original goal he had set for himself. The day stretched on with only a handful of customers dropping by Alan's booth. Sales were far from impressive, and Alan decided that once Luca and the others arrived, he'd close up early. While waiting, his thoughts drifted back to Albert's words. He had already begun to earn money and chase success, so the idea of finding something beyond his goal puzzled him. Suddenly, a stir swept through the crowd as a striking figure made his entrance into the festival. Judging by his regal demeanor and appearance, he was clearly no ordinary citizen. The young man was none other than the heir to the Castellano Marquesate, instantly drawing attention from everyone around. Alan watched him closely, suspecting the noble had come incognito to browse the booths in person. The rumors were true then. Nobles really did visit the festival. With that knowledge, Alan braced himself and stayed alert. Then, to his surprise, the young noble made his way to Alan's stall and inquired about the merchandise. Alan explained that he sold rare items from different regions, specializing in confections and recreational games. He showcased his chocolates, noting their strong aroma and offering the noble a sample. However, the young man's guard immediately stepped in, trying to stop the tasting. The noble, unfazed, waved off the concern, confident that he could handle any fallout. Alan, sensing the subtle tension, could tell the guards weren't pleased. Intrigued, the noble asked more about the chocolates. Alan explained the process. Cacao beans ground and mixed with sugar and vanilla, then hardened into form. To prove their safety, Alan took a piece himself and instructed the noble to hold it by the wrapper since it melted with body heat. Following Alan's advice, the noble tried the chocolate, chewing thoughtfully. His silence stretched long enough to make Alan anxious, but when he finally spoke, he called it amazing. A quick reminder from his guard not to speak with his mouth full brought a wave of relief to Alan. The noble then asked about the price. Alan responded that a box of 8 cost 30,000 gold. Hearing this, the young man seemed surprised because it was cheaper than expected. Alan explained it was a special introductory price, which the noble found acceptable. Without hesitation, he purchased the entire stock, paying more than the price given to him. He insisted on overpaying as a token of appreciation for the surprise and delight the chocolates brought him. Interested now in Alan's other offerings, the noble examined the rest of the sweets, conpeto, caramel, and more, and bought them all with the same enthusiasm. Alan was nearly overwhelmed by the growing pile of gold, while the young noble seemed thrilled to have spent $1 million on sweets alone. Then, his eyes landed on the paper bags, which were the trading cards. Alan explained that each pack contained 5 random cards and that players needed to build decks of 40 to play, with instructions included in a booklet. The noble didn't hesitate. He bought the entire stock on the spot. Though stunned, Alan accepted, still processing the surreal experience. Upon opening a pack, the noble and his guards were impressed by the detailed illustrations. One guard commented on the exceptional quality of the 3,000 gold packs, while another considered buying some himself. Alan listened in disbelief. Everything he had brought was sold out in a single day. He thanked the noble for his patronage, but the boy returned the gratitude, saying the experience had opened his eyes to something new. Before leaving, he asked for Alan's name and he introduced himself humbly. The noble then placed something in Alan's palm and departed, saying he looked forward to seeing him again. Once the noble was gone, Alan looked at his hand. 2 medals. It was, without a doubt, the most unbelievable encounter of his life. Not long after, Camille and Lazuli came rushing in, apologizing for the delay. Upon seeing that everything had already been sold, Camille panicked. Lazuli, equally shocked, remarked that Alan had really pulled it off. They thought they'd arrived quickly, yet had missed it all. Camille, sulking, lamented that she was hoping to get the next volume of her favorite manga. To their delight, Alan had saved a copy just for them. The girls playfully scolded him for not saying so earlier, but were already too excited to read it with the captain. Watching them, Alan laughed to himself. As they gushed over the manga, he realized that perhaps this bond was what Albert meant when he spoke of finding something beyond his goal. Later that night, while Alan was immersed in bookkeeping, Shizuku quietly approached him. She asked why he was still working so late, prompting Alan to explain that he wanted to finish organizing his records. In turn, he asked what she was doing awake at that hour, guessing that she had been reading the newest volume of the manga. But Shizuku told him she had only come for a glass of water, and decided to sit beside him to keep him company. As the night deepened, she casually brought up the Royal Capital's Market Festival and asked if anything interesting had happened. Alan, sensing she may have visited the festival herself, kept the details to share later. Out of nowhere, Alan admitted that his original goal in becoming a merchant had always been simple. He just wanted to get rich. It was never meant to be some grand mission or act of service for others. It was supposed to be his own path for his own gain. Yet, to his surprise, people kept thanking him. That reaction left him unsure of how to feel because he hadn't expected gratitude. Without saying much, Shizuku gently handed him a small box. She called it a token of her appreciation. Alan was caught off guard not just by the gift, but by the fact that Shizuku had been listening all along. When he opened the box, he found a necklace resting inside. It was a radiant gem that shimmered with the full spectrum of color like a rainbow frozen in crystal. Shizuku explained that it was a rare gemstone, something often used as a magical catalyst. Still, she admitted that the necklace alone couldn't possibly express the full extent of her gratitude. She then reminded Alan that even if his reasons were purely personal, his actions had led to something real. Because of him, she was able to reconnect with her family, and with Akira. His motives didn't change the impact he had made. Alan let out a quiet laugh. Her words brought to mind something Ryugen had once said to him, and it was almost uncanny. The resemblance between the two was more than just blood, and it echoed in their thoughts. As the mood shifted, Shizuku asked him to keep looking out for her father and Akira. Alan's expression turned serious. He nodded, promising to do whatever he could. He then thanked her for the necklace, assuring her that he would treasure it and take good care of it. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Ray was still basking in the afterglow of the festival, exclaiming how amazing it had been. But before he could continue, a woman appeared behind him, calling him out for sneaking into town again. The young noble tried to brush it off with a smile, handing her a box of chocolates as a lighthearted peace offering. He promised they'd see each other again tomorrow. As he walked away, she stood still, surprised and silent, the box of chocolates resting gently in her hands. Alan flipped a medal into the air, unsure if it was called a Promaka medal. As he turned it over in his hand, Camille approached, greeting him with a casual good morning. She asked for a closer look at the medal, then questioned why he was wandering around when he had training. Alan explained that it was his break time, so he figured it was fine. As Camille examined the medal, her interest visibly piqued. Alan asked if she recognized it, and to his surprise, she did. So much so that she wondered why he didn't. She asked if it belonged to him, but before he could respond, Luca and Lazuli arrived, inviting them to join for tea. Camille lit up at the offer, while Alan couldn't help but feel a bit frustrated that the medal discussion had been cut short. Once they were seated, Camille's focus quickly shifted to the sweets on the table. Her eyes lit up as she curiously asked what kind of treats they were. Luca explained that the cookies were a gift from Alan, a small thank you for the help the girls had given him during the street festival. As they dug in, Camille pointed to a particularly odd-looking cookie and asked what animal it was meant to be. Alan blinked, surprised she couldn't tell it was a cat. Then again, in this world, cats were nothing like the ones he knew. Here they were wild and aggressive, not the soft, domestic creatures he was used to. Even so, the cookies were met with delight. The girls commented on how cute they were, almost too cute to eat, and couldn't ignore how soft and warm they felt to the touch. Alan, however, couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't quite belong. The cheerful energy around him only made his quiet awkwardness more obvious. Luca soon brought up the festival, saying she had heard it was a huge success. Alan confirmed it was, but admitted that the credit mostly went to one customer who bought everything. He explained that the medals he had were given to him by that very person, which left Camille skeptical. She insisted that couldn't be possible, but Alan stood by his story. Lazuli asked to see the medals, so Alan showed them the gold and silver Promaka medals. When he asked what they were exactly, Luca clarified that Promaka medals were used to access restricted areas. To demonstrate, she revealed her own dungeon access medal. Camille then added that Promaka medals were rare and only given to individuals recognized by the guild. They weren't easy to obtain. Lazuli was especially stunned to see a gold Promaka for the first time. Luca recalled that Camille had a silver Promaka, and Camille explained that hers only granted access to the school district. It allowed her to enter schools marked with the same crest as the medal. Based on Alan's medals, he had access to both the Royal Capital School District and N5 Magic Academy within it. As for the gold medal, it likely gave him entry to the Central District. Luca suggested he consult the academy for confirmation, as someone had likely given him those medals as an invitation. With that, the puzzle pieces began falling into place for Alan. But the realization brought tension because he now had to meet Ray alone, the Marquise's heir. Before he could dwell too much on that, Luca suggested that Camille show him around, since she knew the school district well. Camille agreed, saying she owed him for the manga anyway. Just this once, she'd make an exception and act as his guide. Alan gratefully accepted the offer, feeling relieved to have someone with him on this next step of his journey. Later on, Camille and Alan arrived at the school district. Camille explained that it was the largest district in the royal capital, home not only to various schools but also to government-run research facilities. As she continued to chatter on, Alan quietly appreciated having her by his side. Amid their walk, Camille's focus shifted to the cold gift Alan had brought along.